What is going on, guys? It's divisional round cashing points. Me, Graham Barfield, Ryan Heath. This week, we have plenty to get into. Awesome four-game slate. Should be a really fun weekend of football. But first, a couple important PSAs. After the Super Bowl, all of our DFS and best ball content will be moving over to the DFS and best ball channel. That link is in the description. And then, of course, Fantasy Points 2026 early bird subscription plans are live. Get the rest of 2025 and all of 2026 for the lowest price we'll offer all season. 20% off your selected package. New for 2026, we are splitting out in-season NFL betting into its own package, but as a reward for our loyal subscribers, any Fantasy Pro or Fantasy Bundle subscribers will get our new package included for all of 2026 at no additional cost, but only if you take advantage of our early bird special and purchase a Fantasy Pro or Fantasy Bundle subscription. Also included in a Fantasy Pro or Fantasy Bundle subscription is our industry-leading UFL product. We've had the most accurate UFL projections for the last 2 years, and it's always a blast gambling on spring football. The 2026 UFL draft just happened. Irv Smith, Justin Ross, Laviska Shenault were among some of the names drafted there, so should be a really fun year of spring football. Can always DM me on Twitter, DM me on Instagram, on Discord if you want more info on that. Speaking of accurate projections, we just finished with the most accurate DFS projections in the industry in the 2025 regular season, so shout out Chris Wecht. And if you want access to those projections, make sure you lock in our best rate and our best deal before it expires on Super Bowl Sunday. That's 20% off any Fantasy Point subscription. And just for you guys, I'm throwing in an extra 5% off with promo code THEWORM, one word, no spaces, THEWORM, now through Super Bowl Sunday, the Fantasy Points early bird special. All right, we can get into the games. First game here on Saturday, Buffalo Bills at the Denver Broncos. Bills are underdogs by 1.5. Total here is 45.5. On the injury front, Ty Johnson is questionable. He didn't practice on Tuesday or Wednesday. He did log a limited session on Thursday, so obviously want to keep an eye on him. Graham, I'll start with you here. Bills side, I mean, we saw last week. The entire offense is going to be Josh Allen for the most part. Curious what you think of Allen this week, because he's not projecting quite as the top quarterback play. We've got Bo Nix, we've got Matthew Stafford, better values in our stuff right now, slightly better values across the industry as well. That said, I just love Allen in these spots where the Bills need a win, and obviously they're going to ride him.
Right. We had Allen as the clear QB1 last week, and, even though by value he didn't really get there, those Jordan Love stacks really were the nuts. I think he's clearly the QB1 again this week. Yeah, it's a tougher matchup. Yeah, they're going into Denver. But Allen, across his career, is averaging 25.8 fantasy points per game in playoff games. The dude just has a super high floor because of the rushing. You look since 2023, they've played in 8 playoff games. He's got 8 or more carries and 8 rushing touchdowns in all of those games. You can, quibble with the matchup. Yeah, maybe he doesn't have like a 35 or 38 point ceiling in this game, but he's still clearly the number one quarterback on this slate. I wish I felt really strongly about one of these receivers with all the condensed. I mean, it's just a nightmare. Like they've lost basically everybody. The only guys that really matter still are probably Shakir and Kincaid. Shakir's just too cheap on DraftKings, right? And he has this role where he gets a bunch of shallow targets. He probably won't see a whole lot of Pat Surtain. I like Dalton Kincaid again. Liked him last week. Like him again this week. Brett Whitefield mentioned something to me a couple weeks ago about how the Broncos really struggled to defend crossing routes against tight ends, and that's all Kincaid is good at. So to me, it's Kincaid and Shakir, and I think after that you're just kind of messing around a little bit. Keon Coleman's going to play a lot more. Jake, I'll throw it back to you for your thoughts on James Cook. I mean, obviously, in any game, the Bills are going to win. Cook is going to be pretty good. This line did flip, though. Broncos now 1.5 point favorites. It's tricky with Cook because McCaffrey projects so much better, and I think I can find the money to get up to him.
Yeah, and it's tough with Cook too, because only a 60% snap share, 14.4 expected fantasy points, and that was with Ty Johnson out last week in the wild card round. So
yeah, I got that one wrong. I thought he'd play way more.
Yeah, and I thought he'd get more of a receiving workload.
Exactly.
It's tough when, Josh Allen, anytime he has an opening, is going to run with the ball. He carried the ball 11 times. That was Allen's second most carries that he's logged this season. Also recorded 2 of 3 inside the 5 carries. And, especially later in that game, it just seemed like there was absolutely no chance when the Bills got inside the 5, they were giving the ball to James Cook. Like, it was going to be Josh Allen no matter what. Ryan, I'm curious what you think of Cook, because to me, I'm not, we're not getting anywhere close to James Cook in like cash game formats, but I am still interested in some tournament exposure there. Denver's been pretty good at limiting explosive runs, which is largely where Cook's ceiling has come from. But, he could still break one off here. He's still James Cook, still a guy who's live to push for 16, 18, 20 touches. So yeah, Ryan, I'm curious where you fall on James Cook, because that was sort of one of the tougher tournament assessments for me at running back.
Yeah, I think the argument for him outside of everything you guys have said is maybe the Bills go a little bit more run heavy just kind of naturally with all the receivers that they continue to sustain at the receiver position. And they could have success there. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think I prefer to play the Bills through the passing game here through Josh Allen, not through James Cook. So I expect to come in under... below his projected ownership on Cook in tournaments. But I mean, I wouldn't fault anybody for saying that this is still one of the most explosive running backs in the playoff field, and I want exposure. Like I would totally get that.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well. We've got Josh Allen projected for 22% ownership, Cook at 34%. I'll probably be a bit ahead on Allen's ownership, a bit low on Cook, but as an MME player, obviously want exposure to both. I know Graham already talked about Kincaid and Shakir. I think those are clearly the top 2 options if you are stacking up Allen. Another guy that I have some interest in, at least for the 4-game slate, is Dawson Knox, and obviously anyone who's in play for the 4-game slate would be in play for the Saturday only slate here. But Knox, 45% of red zone targets, 100% of end zone targets over the Bills' last 3 games. With all their receivers beat up, we imagine that they run more 12 personnel, so you might see a bit of a route share bump. Really just needs to fall into the end zone. It is pretty gross, but only 3,300. I think he's okay. And then Ryan, 2 guys that I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions about on Discord, or just, people thinking through this while they watch the show. Keon Coleman versus Brandon Cooks here. Terrell Shavers, Gabe Davis, both out due to a torn ACL. We probably see Curtis Samuel activated off of IR and also play in this game, but they're very thin at wide receiver. Do we have any confidence in playing Coleman and Cooks? I mean, you look at these projections and they're just absolutely pathetic, but I think you have to have a little bit of interest, right?
I don't have that much interest on the 4-game main slate. I think if you're playing a ton of Allen, maybe it makes sense to get to a bit of Cooks there. But specifically on the 2-game Saturday slate, I think thinking through them makes a lot more sense. Cooks' role has been pretty decent these past 2 games that he's played. Easily leads the Bills in air yards, 247 over in those 2 contests, as well as in actual receiving yards per game. So there's been a connection there. I think Cooks is kind of the better play in a vacuum. Keon Coleman is interesting, though. He's $500 cheaper at only $3,500. Will not be as popular. It's just tough with him because it seems like the Bills have gone to every possible length to not play Keon Coleman, right? Like, he has played behind Shavers. He's been behind Gabe Davis, behind Brandon Cooks. Like, they have just buried him on this depth chart. They do not want to play him. They'll probably be forced to this week. He is probably their best run blocker. If that is kind of the game plan they want to go with, more heavy, more 12 personnel, like it makes sense to me to have Coleman on the field there. So that is an angle you could go with. I don't want to give too much fuel to it though, honestly. But there is some upside here. It's a good schematic matchup for Coleman as well. He can beat man coverage. So they're both kind of fringy. But yeah, for all the people that are going to ask which of Cooks or Coleman should I play with Josh Allen on the 4-game slate in Discord on Saturday morning, I'm just going to be saying neither of them, most likely.
Yeah, certainly think that's fair. Really like that analysis there on those 2, probably just 2-game Saturday slate plays for me. Although if you're 150 maxing, I wouldn't hate mixing those guys in a little bit. Graham, moving to the Denver side here, Bo Nix just 5,800. Actually, our top projected quarterback value, at least on DraftKings this week. It feels gross, but like I said, he's a solid value. What do you think of Nix in this spot?
Originally hated him. I was looking at the matchup. It's like, man, McDermott crushed him last season in the playoffs. McDermott did a great job last week against Lawrence. Just a lot of like disguised coverages that kind of confused him. And Nix is definitely more of a see it throw it guy. But then I saw how we have him projected. You can quibble with the ceiling, but like. Yeah, I don't know, man. Like the matchup is bad, but like what if the Bills do really push the scoring pace here and we have to get like some sort of turbo Nix? I think the big thing in terms of his upside this week is the rushing. So last season, they played him in the playoffs, got smoked, only ran 41 plays in that game, but Nix still had 4 carries and 40 yards on those 4 carries. And if they have a little bit better offense in this game, obviously shootout appeal here with Josh Allen, then it's like, okay, I can now see like the upside picture with Nix. And for me, I think the stack this week, my favorite way to play it is actually through Pat Bryant, not Cortland Sutton. I think Sutton sees a lot of Christian Benford. They play a lot of too high. That's typically not Sutton's thing. Pat Bryant is just like way too cheap. He's run more routes than Troy Franklin in 3 of their last 4 games. If you're playing Showdown, I know we typically don't talk Showdown on this pod here, but Pat Bryant's like way too cheap on both Showdown sites, DraftKings and FanDuel, specifically FanDuel. He's like way too cheap, like under 4K. I think he's a really strong play. Harvey, man, is just like so tricky because he ran so hot on the touchdowns, obviously gets, huge goal line roll, but I think you can kind of sell yourself like that the median projection is maybe a little too high on him. Broncos just have not been able to run the ball like since Dobbins went down. They've been like, I think I looked at it like maybe 21st or 22nd yards before contact. Their success rate is just like middling. If they struggle to run the ball again in this spot, it might be more Nix. And the Broncos have already been pretty pass heavy to begin with. So I've really kind of come around on Nix. I think Allen is clearly the QB1. I think Stafford is clearly QB2. But like after that, it's tricky. Like May's in a really tricky spot and priced up. Nix and Caleb Williams project very similarly, and I think Sam Darnold's interesting as well. So it's pretty wide open. I think that the one guy that we're all going to kind of X out is Stroud. I like Nix. I've kind of come around on him. I think the stack is going to be very underowned, especially given how this line has flipped. It was 1.5 Bills all week. I've really come around on Nix, both on the 4-game slate and in Showdown. I think he makes a lot of sense.
Okay, really like that, Graham. Ryan, I'm curious what you think of Nix because I know you are not nearly as excited to play Nix. I think I align more with you, but I want to hear your argument first.
Yeah, very rare that Graham and I disagree so vehemently on a player eval, so this is kind of fun. But yeah, to me, I don't see the upside with Nix. He has just been horrible against any defense that ranks in the top half of EPA per drop back allowed this year. In those 7 games in the regular season, averages just under 220 passing yards per game, 16.4 DraftKings fantasy points per game, hasn't gone over 21 DK in a single one of those 7 games. You mentioned the rushing. I get it as an angle, but I don't know that we have really seen any reason to believe he'll run more. As you said, he ran 4 times in last year's wild card. He averaged 4.9 rush attempts per game in 2025. Like I don't necessarily see that as like a big projection boost. So yeah, I'm very not into Nix. He just kind of hasn't shown up in these spots against these tougher defenses. So I am okay with fading him at ownership. But yeah, of course, have to be a little bit humble. Like there are people that disagree with me. Vegas definitely disagrees with me. Chris Weck's projections definitely disagree with me. Like I know I'm a little bit on an island here, but I can't get that into Nix this week. I do very much agree with you on Pat Bryant. I think he is my favorite kind of cheaper wide receiver, sub 4,500. The schematic matchup is awesome, as you mentioned. 6.3 targets per game since the Broncos' bye. That is more than basically every other 4K range receiver on this slate. So the volume has been really solid with him. We haven't seen him kind of pop for that massive game yet, but I do think it could be in this spot. But I mean, I'll also throw out a bone to Courtland Sutton up at 5,900. He's kind of priced in a range where we just don't have very many like mid-range wide receiver options. So that's kind of nice. And also, even if Courtland Sutton's upside is not this 25 DraftKings points like per game upside that gets you super excited, this ultimately is a short 4-game slate that could be a very low scoring slate that features a lot of the NFL's best defenses. Just kind of a ho-hum, like 15, 16 DraftKings points out of Courtland Sutton could end up in the optimal. That would not be the craziest thing on this slate. So yeah, don't want to totally forget about Sutton, but I fully agree that Bryant would be my favorite play in this passing game. And I do think that Harvey is one of the best running back plays on the slate, but I'll give that back to Jake to kind of make the case there.
Yeah, I really like Harvey. I think Harvey's a must play in cash. Obviously can get away from him in tournaments, but there just aren't a ton of running back plays that we have a ton of confidence in this week. Harvey's earned 80% of backfield goal line carries since week 15, has easily led the backfield in route share, target share, and expected fantasy points per game over that stretch. Obviously, Buffalo's a great matchup, fourth softest schedule-adjusted rushing matchup for opposing running backs this year. The Bills have also allowed the fifth highest explosive run rate, the third most yards per carry. They've allowed I think 5 different 30-point fantasy games to running backs over the course of the season. So we even saw it last week with the Jaguars. They were pretty efficient running the ball. So really, really good spot for Harvey at just 6,200. Not a must-play in tournaments, but I think absolutely a must-play in cash with the way he is projecting this week. Ryan, were there any other Denver receivers that stood out to you? I mean, Pat Bryant, Courtland Sutton, they're kind of neck and neck in our projections. And then after that, there's a huge gap. Evan Ingram is projecting as the next best value, but Buffalo's a brutal tight end matchup. Do you have any love for like a Troy Franklin, a Marvin Mims on the 2-game slate? I kind of like Mims if you're playing like 2-game or showdown, just because he's so explosive. You know, obviously has that big play upside, but I really don't have a strong take on these other guys. They all seem pretty thin.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to Ingram. I think even on the 4-game slate, if you were going to play a lot of Knicks, it would make sense to mix in some Troy Franklin just because we have seen these Denver receivers and their roles shift so many different times this year. Sean Payton is bored and has to switch things up every single week. So it is entirely possible that Franklin has the better role than Pat Bryant in any given game. Nobody's really going to play him. So that would be fair enough to me if you wanted to mix in some Troy Franklin. But I don't think I would go to anybody else.
All right. Well, I think we covered that game pretty well. Let's move it on to the San Francisco 49ers at the Seattle Seahawks. This is the second game on Saturday. The 49ers are 7-point underdogs here, easily the biggest spread of the playoff weekend. Total is 44.5 points. On the injury front, Ricky Pearsall is questionable. He's optimistic he can play. He noted on Wednesday night to the San Francisco Chronicle that he's going to have setbacks if he continues to land on his knee. And then there was also a quote that we just got from Kyle Shanahan in the Coach Speak Index that I'm going to read out. This is on what Shanahan saw from Pearsall this week, and will Pearsall be on a snap count if he plays? We wouldn't put him on a snap count. I saw improvement. He's still battling it, and that's why he's questionable. We would never put a guy on an exact snap count, especially in a playoff game. But we also understand where he's at, and that would probably have to be different than his true status of when he's 100% healthy. So it does sound like some limitations for Pearsall. Doesn't sound like he will be 100%. But like I said, he's optimistic that he will play this week. And then on the Seattle side, Sam Darnold is listed as questionable with an oblique. That sounds largely precautionary. Picked that up today, but he's expected to play. So wouldn't worry too much about Darnold. Pearsall's really the guy you want to keep an eye on in this game. Graham, speaking of the 49ers, we saw him pull off the upset against the Eagles last week. We also saw George Kittle go down. So things should be a little bit more condensed around these pass catchers, especially with Pearsall, like I said, likely limited, not 100%. Where are you at on Purdy and the 49ers offense overall in this spot?
Yeah, these two games were just kind of gross for fantasy this year. Both matchups basically. Like didn't really do much of anything really in terms of scoring or yardage. I think Purdy's been incredible to close out the back half of the season, but we have to do like some level of schedule analysis here, right? Like he crushed in the Bears game, crushed in the Colts game, crushed in the Titans game. He was okay last week, pretty efficient, but still did throw the 2 picks. I was wrong on Purdy last week, but I mean, this is like, in my opinion, clearly the second worst matchup for quarterback this week, behind only May versus the Texans. Pearsall's status is huge because, like I said last week, I mean, they just don't have anybody to really stretch the field besides apparently Demarcus Robinson. What the hell? Yeah, in terms of the receiving group, I think Tonjes probably is the best pound for pound value on DK. He's 3,400. He's been solid, like low end tight end 1 numbers. When Kittle was out, he doesn't have a lot of upside, but the volume should be good, and the matchup is really good. Seattle, if they struggle in one spot, it is against tight ends. I think it feels point chasey with Demarcus Robinson. If Pearsall is out, then Robinson is really going to come up in the projections. We'll just have to see on that. And then, I mean, Christian McCaffrey, man. I mean, I originally was like, I think we were talking this morning, and I was like, man, I kind of think I like JSN more. I think I like Nakua more. And I looked into it a little deeper. 6 games without Kittle this season. He's averaging 16.7 PPR points per game just on his receiving. It'd make him a top 10 running back, top 10 receiver over the full season. That pulled me immediately back in, and especially in a game where I think Seattle just smokes them. I think they're just a significantly better team defensively, and they have such an advantage both in the run and pass game. I think Seattle kind of wins this game handily. So McCaffrey getting like 9, 10, 11, 12 targets in this spot is certainly not out of the question. And then obviously he's got a ton of touchdown equity. So I've kind of come back in on like, I think you just play McCaffrey in every lineup and just let the chips fall where they may. But Jake, I'm curious if you guys, got any other thoughts on that, because I mean, it's just, he projects so much better than the rest of this running back slate.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, we have a very clear top 3 running back values on the slate. RJ Harvey being the best, Zach Charbonnet's up there, and then of course Christian McCaffrey. And there's really nowhere to go if you are paying up. I mean, there's James Cook, but McCaffrey really stands head and shoulders above him. I think a big decision point for people is going to be McCaffrey versus Puka, McCaffrey versus JSN. At least right now, I think I'd rather have more Puka exposure, but you could definitely sell me on more McCaffrey over JSN, especially because I think Seattle would probably slow things down if they do get a lead, and lean into the run a little bit more. Ryan, I'm curious what you think of the 49ers side here. Any other thoughts on McCaffrey, these pass catchers, Brock Purdy?
Yeah, I agree. I would rank it Puka over Christian McCaffrey over Jackson Smith and Jigba in terms of the expensive plays. So we would line up there. I'm giving the 49ers a little bit more of a chance than I think most of the industry is. If you just look back at the historical matchups between Brock Purdy and Mike McDonald defenses versus Sam Darnold and Robert Saleh defenses, Purdy has fared a lot better. Now that Darnold has escaped with wins and everything, and that is one thing. But in terms of fantasy scoring, Purdy is the one that hasn't had his fantasy points per drop back cut in half like Sam Darnold has against solid defenses. So I do think Purdy's interesting. If he is going to be much lesser owned, he makes for kind of a cheaper stacking partner with a Christian McCaffrey. He is just as correlated with CMC as Sam Darnold is with Jackson Smith and Jigba this year. So I kind of like just playing it from the other side in that way. This is very Galaxy Brain GPP stuff. Purdy is nowhere near even like a top 3 or 4 quarterback play on the slate for me. But yeah, I'm giving him a little more consideration than it sounds like Graham is. I agree Demarcus Robinson is interesting if Pearsall sits. I don't know that I have the stones to go there at 4,400 if Pearsall does play, which it kind of sounds like he's trending toward. but it's a good schematic matchup for Demarcus Robinson. Like there's some stuff there that makes me kind of think. And the only other guy you guys didn't really mention that I wanted to bring up was Jawan Jennings. So yeah, Christian McCaffrey's splits without George Kittle are incredible, but Jennings are also pretty decent. In 6 games over the past 2 seasons that Kittle has missed, Jennings averages 19.1 DraftKings fantasy points per game. He's been running from the slot more over the past 2 weeks. That'll help him avoid Reek Woolen over on the outside. So that's another little plus to Jawan Jennings. And I mean, one of those games without Kittle was the 50 burger that he dropped in week 3 of 2024. But even there have been a few other good scores from him with Kittle on the bench. So yeah, I wouldn't forget about Jennings either. I think you could easily do a Purdy double with Christian McCaffrey, Jawan Jennings, mix and match Tonjes there, who is also a good play for the reasons you guys outlined. Yeah, I have more interest in the 49ers, maybe against my better judgment given the spread, but I don't know. I think this could be one where Kyle Shanahan kind of pulls a magic trick. I wouldn't be that surprised.
Yeah, I do like that for tournaments, and for what it's worth, at least on Tonjes, he's right there with Colston Loveland as our top projected tight end value on the slate. Certainly worthy of cash consideration for him. Ryan, moving over to the Seattle side, pretty solid on paper matchup here for Sam Darnold. No Fred Warner again for the San Francisco defense, and obviously a huge implied total for Seattle. How much interest do you have in the Seattle passing game this week?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of gave the preview. On paper, it's pretty solid, and I understand why Darnold is going to project for ownership. From straight up, it feels like he is the best kind of cheaper quarterback play. He projects that way around the industry. Pass funnel 49ers defense, by far the weakest remaining defense in the playoffs by EPA per drop back, adjusted net yards per attempt allowed. But for me, I just don't see the fantasy upside as much with Darnold. Hasn't hit 9 fantasy points in any of his previous 3 meetings with a Robert Saleh defense. And those are these 49ers defenses and the Jets defense back in week 5 of 2024. Not exactly like the most imposing or most talented units. So yeah, this seems like a very believable Sam Darnold implosion spot to me. When there's going to be ownership on him, I'm personally fine coming in under that. But he may end up in the cash build around the industry, and I wouldn't be that surprised. It kind of makes sense. Highest implied total on the slate. Like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, I understand, but that's just how I'm kind of approaching this on a small slate. Like if there's a quarterback I don't feel that great about that is going to be one of the top 2 or 3 most played ones, I'm probably not going to get to him that much. But yeah, JSN, amazing play. Completely, just sells himself. 29.1 DraftKings fantasy points per game in the top 50% of his games this season. That is just behind Puka Nacua. So yeah, for some of those reasons, overall game environment reasons, I prefer Puka to JSN, but really strong play. You should be trying to build lineups with both of them probably. So yeah, really awesome. Other than that, I can't really sell myself on Cooper Kupp. He's 3,500. It's a good schematic matchup for him, but he still did nothing in either of those previous games against the 49ers. So I would just rather look elsewhere to save at the wide receiver position. And then AJ Barner is a decent value just because he gets decent target volume, 5 targets per game since week 11, and especially on this team, highest implied total, decent touchdown equity. They use him at the goal line as the tush push guy sometimes. So at just 3,600, he's a decent value at tight end.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty strong summary of these Seattle pass catchers. Graham, it feels like the sky's falling a bit because Zach Charbonnet is just straight up out projecting Ken Walker, and I mean it's for great reason. Charbonnet has outsnapped Walker, earned more carries than Walker, earned more targets than Walker, earned outright better usage than Walker, to the extent of 16.8 expected fantasy points per game to 10.7 expected fantasy points per game over their last 3 games together. I mean, we know Walker is sort of running laps around Charbonnet in terms of explosive run rate, but, outside of that, everything is really pointing towards Charbonnet. Walker's last carry inside the 10 was in week 12. Charbonnet's averaged 2.1 opportunities per game inside the 10 since week 12. So, I mean, Graham, do you have any interest in Walker? I think he's a little interesting for the 2-game slate for Showdown, but Charbonnet's projecting as a really strong value. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this backfield here.
Yeah, I think you build a rule that you have min one Seahawk running back in every lineup and really heavily weight that towards Charbonnet because, like you said, he's the goal line back. I mean, this 49ers run defense is so bad, guys. Like, they've given up 130 or more rushing yards in 4 out of their last 6 games. They gave up 110 to the Bears in that span. Basically, the only team that didn't get them was the Phillip River-led Colts, and that's just kind of obvious. You just scheme out, take JT out against with Rivers under center. I think Charbonnet is my favorite running back play on the slate. He's just way too cheap, 5,300. Touchdown equity's amazing, and like you said, he's straight up out snapping Walker, getting some decent usage in the pass game too. He's got 4, 2, and 4 targets in his last 3. So I love Charbonnet. If you wanted to just kind of play it like maybe the Niners lay an egg or they struggle without Kittle. I mean, Charbonnet with Seahawks defense is just like massively correlated. You can make an argument for that. Especially in this with this spread here.
Yeah, and I think if you're playing the 2-game slate, I mean, you could even play both Charbonnet and Walker with the Seattle defense, and really hope San Francisco is just a total disaster, and these guys combine for 35, 40 touches. I think that's a pretty interesting angle there. Charbonnet right behind RJ Harvey in our projections as the top running back value of the slate.
Yeah, typically we don't want to play running backs against each other, but I think because of McCaffrey's receiving role and his equity in that that department, you just treat McCaffrey as a receiver, and you can it's a 4-game slate. Play one of these Seahawks running backs with McCaffrey for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about that on a 4-game slate, especially with McCaffrey's receiving equity as you touched on. All right, I think that does it for this game. We can keep it moving to the Sunday slate. First game here, Houston Texans at the New England Patriots. Texans are 3-point dogs. Total is 40.5. On the injury front, Nico Collins has not practiced all week with a concussion. He looks extremely unlikely to play. Jawar Jordan logged a pair of limited practices after missing the wild card round due to a high ankle sprain, so want to keep an eye on him and this Texans backfield here as we get more news. Ryan, we'll start with the Texans offense. We sort of already hinted at this, but Stroud does kind of feel like the odd man out on what is a pretty solid quarterback slate overall. Obviously some tough matchups across the board, but it just really doesn't seem like Stroud's getting a lot of interest here. I think the one thing that you could say for Stroud is that stacking him is very, very cheap this week with no Nico Collins. We've got Dalton Schultz, Christian Kirk, Xavier Hutchinson, all under 4,500. Jaden Higgins only 4,600. So, Ryan, I'm curious what you think of Stroud because I do kind of have a hard time thinking through Stroud angles beyond I'm just saving a ton of salary if I stack this guy up.
Yeah, I can't get on to Stroud himself, really. I don't see the upside in that. I do see the appeal in terms of the receivers, though. I think you can pick 1 or maybe even 2 of the receivers if you're trying to save salary that way, and just assume that one of the other quarterbacks, maybe one that has a little more rushing upside, a Josh Allen, a Caleb Williams in the next game, outscores him even despite 1 or 2 of his receivers being optimal. So it's more interesting to think through the receivers for me with Nico Collins out. Christian Kirk is going to be by far the most popular. I understand why. He just went for 31.4 fantasy points on 14.7 expected fantasy points last week. Had an amazing game, looked awesome. He projects as the best value of the 3 Texans wide receivers for us. But to me, I think I would rather, at least in GPPs, for cash, Kirk is totally fine. In GPPs, I'm kind of intrigued by pivoting to a Xavier Hutchinson or to a Jaden Higgins because we've seen this before with Nico Collins being out. In those two games, Hutchinson averaged 17.2 DraftKings fantasy points per game, team high 30% first read target share. Higgins was a bit behind that in terms of volume, but yeah, was running a full-time route share. We have seen one of Hutchinson or Higgins outscore Kirk in 7 of the trio's last 11 games together. So I don't think if there's a big gap in ownership between these guys, I'm going to want to spread my bets kind of onto the lesser owned ones. And that is likely going to be Hutchinson and Higgins. I think Higgins is the best player, has the most talent-based upside here. He's also the most expensive. The one most likely to not run like a completely full-time route share. So I think pound for pound, Hutchinson ends up being my favorite kind of GPP dart. But all of them are completely understandable to cycle in and out of your lineups, especially if you're MMEing.
Yeah, only other pass catcher I wanted to throw out there was Dalton Schultz. He's going to be pretty popular. I mean, no slate-eligible tight end has more games of 9+ targets this season than Schultz. He has 4 such games. And yeah, I mean, the odds of a high target outing obviously increase with no Nico Collins. Ryan also had a good note that New England runs cover 2 at a top 5 rate. Schultz has seen a 58% target per out run boost against that coverage shell. So, pretty good target ceiling for Schultz. He's not quite in like the Tanjas, Colston, Loveland tier, but he is one of the better tight end plays of the slate. And then, Graham, we obviously also have to talk through Woody Marks. Marks is the kind of guy who I really want to play in positive game script. I mean, he hasn't had a double-digit target share game since week 9. But, if you play this game through the angle of Texans win, maybe you're rostering Texans defense, I think that makes Marks a very exciting play, even if Jawar Jordan is active here. Graham, I'm curious what you think of Marks on this slate.
We nailed the Marks call last week. That was a great call by you, Jake. Yeah, Woody with Texans D was the nuts. I'm completely off of it this week, though. I think the Texans, they probably really struggled to move the ball in this spot with no Nico. We saw Vrabel take a very, very aggressive blitz-heavy plan last week, and that was kind of trending up in terms of just how they're getting their pass rush. Patriots had been blitzing a lot more, and then obviously last week they just went in and just tried to speed up the clock for Herbert, and that really worked. I could see them taking a very similar plan this week and just trying to really force Stroud into some bad decisions. I'm pretty much off Texans, and you look at this game total. It's at 40.5 over under. It's the lowest divisional round game total we've had since the NFL expanded the playoffs in 2020. We've got 3 other good games that are very solid in terms of the total and both pace and plays. I think this game by far has the biggest chance to just be a total dud. I'm kind of just off Texans. I agree with everything that Ryan said about Xavier Hutchinson. I think he's a really good value on DraftKings. He's unplayable, unfortunately, on FanDuel if you're playing over on FanDuel. Kirk's 6,100, Higgins is 59, and I think Hutchinson's 54. They're all kind of gross over there. But sub 4K receivers this week clearly are Pat Bryant and Hutchinson to me. Moving on to the Patriots side real quick, man. We got the Stephon Diggs process right last week. He played his 3rd highest share of routes last week at 86%, but obviously that game just was a total nightmare. Basically no pace, no scoring. This week I kind of see a similar type situation, but I do have to say Diggs is a very good technical value at 5,800 with this full-time role. And especially if maybe I'm wrong and this game environment does, kind of produce maybe a 46 or 48, combined point total, then yeah, Diggs is probably going to be a really good play. Patriots side, man, I think Ramondre is pretty interesting at 5,800, maybe a little bit contrarian because I think most people are going to want to play Seattle running backs. He's just straight up had a better role than Trevion their last couple games. Trevion just doesn't play in the passing game. I don't think they trust him at all as a pass blocker. So if this game is pretty tight, it should be a lot of Stevenson, and I think Stevenson's just been their better back straight up. So Patriots defense plus Stevenson makes a ton of sense if you just want to fade Texans, or a Stevenson with one of the Texans receivers. Mini makes a lot of sense. Jake, we've been all over Drake May every single week. This feels weird to not like him, but I mean, the Texans defense, I mean, they have one of the best defenses we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's a pretty brutal on paper matchup across the board for New England, and that definitely does give me some pause on Drake May, but still a guy that I want some exposure to. Ryan, I'm curious what you think of May here, because this is tricky where it's like just a brutal on paper matchup, but we know Drake May's a great player and can light up the scoreboard in the right circumstances. So what do you think?
Yeah, I feel okay about him. I'm pretty lukewarm. He'd be like my 4th favorite quarterback play on the slate. I'd rank him like slightly above Purdy. What you can say about May and this New England offense, especially if last week is anything to go by, is they are going to live or die by how impactful these scrambles are for May. Like if he breaks off multiple big scrambles, New England's probably going to win the game. May could even have a chance to score the most of any quarterback on the slate. Season high 66 rushing yards last week, only threw 1 touchdown, but went for over 19 DraftKings points. You can talk yourself into a ceiling game for May here. He is really good. He could just overcome this matchup. Not my favorite angle on the slate. Don't think it's especially likely, but you have to respect just the playmaking ability of somebody like Drake May on this slate. So he'll be in my pool. He's in my mind. Agree that Stephon Diggs is kind of the most obvious stacking partner for the reasons that Graham laid out. Do want to mention Kayshon Boutte at 4,300. He is up there in terms of the cheaper receivers for me. It's, of course, a really rough on-paper matchup. It's a pretty solid schematic matchup. Boutte has really been May's go-to guy against cover 4, which Houston likes to run at a top 5 rate. There can be like just kind of the deep target boom game you get out of Boutte potentially. So he's pretty interesting as a way to save salary. Hunter Henry is Hunter Henry. He's the same play every single week. If he scores a touchdown, he's a decent play at 4,500. If he doesn't, then he probably isn't. And that's kind of all there is to say about him.
Yeah. Just a couple more notes on those guys. Houston's actually, despite having a great defense, they've actually allowed the 10th most deep receiving yards per game. And as Ryan mentioned, Boutte does lead the team in deep receiving targets. And then with Steph Diggs, I mean, the 85% route share is pretty huge for him because he has been one of the most efficient wide receivers in the league on a per route basis. He's averaged 0.53 fantasy points per route run. That ranks 12th of 149 qualifiers, and 0.25 targets per route run. That would rank 20th. So definitely like both those calls. I think it's pretty straightforward if you're stacking May. You're just sort of mixing and matching those 3 guys. And then to sort of echo what Graham said on Ramondre Stevenson, this is, a little similar to Zach Charbonnet and Ken Walker. Obviously not nearly as good of a matchup, but Stevenson's just sort of earning a better workload in every regard, like clearly the preferred pass down back. We sort of thought after, the way weeks 16, 17, 18 went that Travion Henderson would be earning more carries should New England get a lead. That didn't really play out in the wild card round. Stevenson earned more carries, 10-9 there. So, it is, I have a hard time being sold on Henderson beyond like a showdown play. Maybe Sunday only if you think like New England blows this team out, but really just want to play Ramondre here in this backfield. Ryan, anything else to add on New England, the backfield? I feel like we covered this pretty well.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the most fun game.
All right. Time for the most fun game. This is the cap on the divisional round. I believe this kicks off 6:30 on Sunday. It's the Los Angeles Rams at the Chicago Bears. Rams are 3.5-point favorites. Total is 48.5. The only real injury note here is that Terrence Ferguson will be back for the Rams. Also, there are some cold weather concerns. Please do not double count this. I'm sure I will be saying this in Discord Saturday, Sunday morning, but this is all factored into our projections. Cold weather generally not a big issue for these guys. They are professional football players. I know there's a little bit of wind, but again, it's all accounted for in our projections, accounted for in the Vegas line, which heavily influences our projections. So please do not double count the weather when you see that it's very, very cold at Soldier Field. Ryan, let's start with the Bears side. I think the Rams probably a bit more straightforward. Caleb Williams, I mean, I felt like last week was just like a classic Caleb Williams game where it's so frustrating, and then you see these wow plays where you're just like, oh my gosh, this guy can be, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I'm curious where you fall on Williams this week because, it's a bit like May where you have to respect the playmaking ability. He's not projecting as one of the best quarterback values, but he's certainly a guy I want to get to. Where are you at there?
Yeah, so I'm looking at this slate as Josh Allen and Matt Stafford are the two best quarterback plays, like straight up, regardless of ownership. But when we look at our projected ownership, we're coming in at single digits for Caleb Williams right now, 9%. At that number, I think Caleb is just my favorite GPP play on the slate. The Bears have gone pass heavy the last 4 games. They've gone up to a 67% pass rate over that period. That would be second highest in the league over the full season. And that has coincided with when they've put Colston Loveland into this full-time role. Of course, it has also been, these have been must-win games that have been either back and forth or the Bears trailing, but that's what this spread suggests, a 3.5-point spread, highest over-under on the slate. So, yeah, I kind of don't get why the field isn't more into Caleb Williams and the Bears. Over the last 4 games, 23 DraftKings fantasy points per game for Williams. That would lead all quarterbacks this year, 6th best in adjusted net yards per attempt over that range. So, yeah, the offense is clicking. He's got all of his guys back. I'm pretty excited to play Caleb at 6,100. The tricky part is who do you stack him with? My answer to that is you play enough Caleb lineups to where you're mixing and matching multiple of these guys so that you're kind of covering your bases. My favorite is clearly Colston Loveland. He's just had an absurd role over his last 5 games, 9.2 targets per game, 15.9 expected fantasy points per game. Jake had a bunch of awesome notes in the slate breakdown that's going to drop on Friday morning, comparing Loveland's and Trey McBride's production this season. Loveland, he's priced up at 5,500, but that's still not enough for how great this role has been. So if you think the Bears succeed at all, Loveland is just an amazing play.
Yeah, and just to cut in, Ryan, Loveland is 90% of Trey McBride's expected fantasy points as usage at 70% of peak Trey McBride price. We were paying 7,500 for McBride later in the season. Loveland should be 6,500 on this slate. He is a fantastic play.
Yeah, so Loveland is the Bear that I want to stack with Caleb the most. And then it gets interesting kind of between these other 3 wide receivers. We saw Luther Burden run the 3rd most routes of the 3 of them, but we still know he is the most efficient per route, per touch player on this offense. He has very likely the best schematic matchup of these 3 receivers where he's been more successful against zone coverage this year. Burden's just a very dynamic player. He's the cheapest as well at 4,700. Will probably see the most ownership, but if you just wanted to go Caleb, Burden, Loveland, I wouldn't fault you too much. But then Rome Odunze and DJ Moore, also both awesome plays to me. They're both projecting in our stuff for just single-digit ownership right now, but in this game environment, you have to be interested in both of them, especially mixing and matching in Caleb stacks, as I mentioned. For Odunze, the Rams have funneled more volume to the outside, 4th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed out there, so that helps Odunze somewhat. DJ Moore has had kind of these random multi-touchdown games, even if the volume isn't amazing. He leads the Bears in end zone targets since week 12, can certainly have a spike week at any given time. And with virtually nobody playing him, you kind of have to like it. So I'm just crazy into all these Bears. My most popular way that I'm going to build, or my most frequent way I'm going to build, is Bear stack and then all the chalk and the best plays around it, basically, and mixing and matching variations of that. So that's where I'm at on this slate, for if anybody was curious. But I'll give it back to you guys to talk about the Bears running game or to talk about the Rams.
Yeah, so love that analysis on the Bears passing game. Do you think that's one of the more underrated spots for tournaments this week? When it comes to the backfield, I'm not overly excited to play either Swift or Monungai, but the schematic matchup and the projected game script with the Bears being underdogs, both of those elements do favor Swift. Swift averages 5.3 yards per carry on zone concepts. Monungai is about a full yard lower on zone concepts. The Rams have allowed the 8th most yards per carry on zone concepts this season. And then, of course, when the Bears are trailing, Swift averages about 16% more expected fantasy points per snap. So I would want to lean into Swift between the two. I think especially for showdown, though, Monungai worthy of some consideration, could definitely fall into the end zone there. Graham, anything to add on Bears? And then, of course, got to talk Stafford and the Rams. Great spot for that offense.
Yeah, I wanted to play or get a little excited for Swift, but then I looked last week. The usage was basically the exact same. Like the XFP is just split basically almost down the middle with the slight edge going to Swift once again. I just don't really have a whole lot of interest in Ryan's take on them being more pass heavy is a good one. Rams side, man, it's just like, I talked myself more into McCaffrey, especially vis-a-vis JSN today as I kind of dug deeper into it. Puka, though, like, you just jam in Puka. Like, it's just the best possible spot. Like, Bears were getting destroyed by slot receivers all season, gave up the second most fantasy points to slot receivers during the regular season. It's just like a perfect matchup overall for Puka. Just way, way too cheap. I think you play him in every lineup and just kind of try to figure out the rest from there. The running backs kind of went back to a little bit more Kyron. I think we know what this is going to be. He's probably going to be the goal line back. He's probably going to get more of the receiving work than Corum, but I do want to just like hold a little bit of like weight for Corum at 5,100 in tournaments. Kyron certainly is the better play. I think he's a decent value. But Corum 5,100, you could play this as like maybe the Bears get down double digits again and they use Corum as kind of the closer back. He has gotten double digit carries in 5 out of his last 6 games. So he's a little interesting as a tournament play. Adams got a ton of volume last week, but I got to be honest, I just got like beer goggles on for Puka. Jake, Adams, clearly has the touchdown equity, got the 13 targets last week, looked pretty healthy as well. I don't know if he was able to open it up as much as he wanted to on that deep ball that Stafford slightly overthrew him on. But 6,500 is a pretty good price. I've just kind of come in on meh on Adams, but he clearly makes a whole lot of sense, especially if you're doubling with Stafford. You just play, all the Puka, Adams, and Stafford together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Adams at 25-30% ownership, which is what he's projected for across the industry, I think is about right. Ryan did have a really good note that Adams sees a 21% target per route run boost, 32% fantasy point per route run boost against man this year. The Bears have deployed man coverage at a 34% rate over their last 5 games. That would rank 5th most in the NFL this season. We also know, Adams has incredible touchdown equity. He set the fantasy points data record for end zone targets with 27 in the regular season, and that was, while he missed a few games. And then, like you said, Graham, also had great volume last week, 25.1 expected fantasy points in the wild card round. So, yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. If you are doubling Stafford, getting to Puka, getting to Adams, I think some people are going to want to know about the tight ends. And, man, I had a really hard time sort of deciphering between Parkinson and Tyler Higbee. Initially, I thought I was going to be a bit higher on Higbee because he had a 13.7 average depth of target in his last 2 games, which is much higher than Parkinson's 5.3. And the only reason I bring that up is because Chicago has allowed the 4th most deep receiving yards per game this season. But both of those games came without Terrence Ferguson. And when Terrence Ferguson is in the lineup, he's the guy who's earning all those deep routes. I looked at, Higbee and Parkinson's games together with Ferguson, and they're both sub 5 average depth of target guys. So it's really just like, who do you think is going to fall into the end zone? Our projections have them neck and neck right now. I believe a slight lean toward Higbee, but it's very, very close. So when it comes to those two, I'm largely just like flipping a coin. Unless Ryan, do you have anything that I missed on those tight ends?
I don't. I wish I did, Jake. You asked me to look over that in the slate breakdown, and yeah, I just could not go any deeper than you did. Could not find an angle there. I wish I had something.
All right. Well, yeah. So both those guys, absolutely in play. I don't think Ferguson, Davis Allen really project well enough to be anything other than showdown consideration guys. And I do really like Graham's angle on Blake Corum, especially for the 2-game slate. I think like him plus Rams defense is a bit interesting there. Ryan, Graham, anything else to add on this game before we get out of here?
I don't think so. I think Stafford is clearly the QB2 on the slate, though.
Yeah.
It's like
Agreed.
a massive gap between him and the QB3 as we've been talking more through the slate.
Yep. Yeah, I am right there with you. This should be a really, really fun weekend of football. Always love the playoffs. Hope everybody enjoys the games this weekend. And we will be back next week for the conference championship edition of Cashing Points. But in the meantime, we will see you all at the top of the leaderboard.